What's up, guys? This is Mike on Post Patrol. Today, we're going to talk about something I've been putting off for a while. Before we get started, let me just go ahead and tell you the U.S. is 100% responsible for what's happening in Ukraine. There was actually a treaty that the United States agreed to during the fall of the Soviet Union that we would not expand not 1 inch towards the east. And since then, we violated that treaty time after time. We're at a point where we have basically not only expanded east, but we have gone all the way up to the Russian border. We're going to jump into a couple of videos that's going to break this down for you. If you actually care, you can go do some research and find this out on your own. Most people don't care. They just choose to side with their country and whatever the media is telling them, because all we've heard from this administration is that Putin has started an unprovoked war. Unprovoked, completely unprovoked. We have no idea how. He's absolutely berserk. He's gone off the rails and he started this war. No one ever did anything to him. No one caused this to happen. He's just a lunatic that started this war on his own for no reason at all. Let's go ahead and jump into this.
When Trump got in office and he mentioned that there's a deep state, they're like, you can't say that. What are you doing? And when he said, hey, when they asked him, why are you leaving your troops in Syria? And he said, for the oil. They're like, you can't. Yeah. He goes, no, it's for the oil. No, it's for liberty. It's for helping the people. Yeah. No, it's for the oil. It's our oil. And so he let the cat out of the bag, and they can't have that. That's what he blew the whistle on what's actually going on. Our wars are for oil. Our wars are economic wars, just like what's happening in Ukraine. This is an economic war. We're trying to put a hurt and isolate Russia. We're afraid of Russia and their natural resources and their manpower coming together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And we've been saying that for decades. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And that's why this Ukraine war is happening. And people have no idea what's happening. And what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea what's happening.
Yeah. To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
Certainly not the way we look at it. I'm sure that's not the way you look at it, but that is exactly what happened. I mean, look at the record. So pulling this up, we can see here the countries that have joined NATO since the collapse of the Soviet Union. What are these countries? We have Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia and Slovenia, Albania and Croatia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. Guys, at this point, what the hell is this guy talking about when he's like, I'm sure that's the way Putin looks at it. I don't think that's the way we look at it. Well, you know, I mean, when you look at history, it doesn't matter how anyone looks at this, okay? The reality is this is what happened. You have, as the United States government, expanded further and further east, literally surrounding Russia on the entire Western Front. What are you talking about? That's the way Putin looks at it. I'm sure that's the way Putin looks at it. That's the way anyone would look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to move
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to
none of
within
that
10
matters.
Kilometers of the border with Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO.
None of the things he just said mattered. Any of everything, it doesn't matter what Putin did to order whatever, all that is nonsense, okay? He just told him, like, you expanded towards Russia, and the treaty said you shall not move 1 inch. But you have, and he basically tries to sidestep that question. He's like, yeah, well, Putin did this and that and blah, 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 about whatever, blah, 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 blah. None of that matters, because you violated the treaty. But let's keep going.
Who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern states.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a
we
member
did
of
that.
NATO. So unless that's changed.
It's not changed. But I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
If NATO is moved east, The reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved, not
NATO
because
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Watch.
Unfortunately, for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand it?
Union?
So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians would perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a
It
fact.
has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But
And so
there's
the
no reason
reason-
for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security
Which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member.
Yeah.
Which is not a NATO member.
I see to you
Other
on that
countries
point.
feel threatened.
What are your thoughts when you see that?
Well, it's obvious that they don't want you to know the real history. They don't want you to know that when Germany was allowed to reunify, the promise from NATO to Russia was that we won't expand NATO. And then, of course, it did. I think there's 13 or something more countries that they put into NATO. And now they wanted to put Ukraine into NATO or threaten to do that. That would be like if Russia got into a military alliance with Mexico and they wanted to start putting military bases in Mexico. We wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow it. And just
Or
like what
Canada.
happened with Cuba with the missile crisis in the 60s, we wouldn't allow stuff like that. But we're doing that, and people don't want you to know that this NATO is not a defensive, it is offensive. This is a war that was started and provoked by NATO and the West. Zelensky ran on
There you go.
peace. He ran on bringing the country back together, right? The Russian speakers in the East, the Donbass. But he didn't do it. So why? Because he got threatened by NATO and the ultra-right, the Nazis in Ukraine. And so they threaten to kill. He knows he's a dead man if he does a peace deal with Russia. So that's why he won't. And when they had a peace deal in March, and that's when Boris Johnson from the UK flew there and said, hey, you don't do this. And he killed the peace deal. So Russia is the one that wants peace in this deal, and Ukraine and NATO do not. They want to bleed Russia economically, and that's why they blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And they
Allegedly.
they've always said they were going to do it, and they did it. And for the life of me, I can't get why the European nations are going along with this.
So, for anyone out there who I'm pretty sure is going to be like, oh, you're just, a Putin lover or this or that. No, absolutely not. I actually condemn all the crap that he's been doing. But at the same time, I understand why this is happening.
The foreign minister of Germany said, I don't care about my people if they don't want this. I care about the people of Ukraine. What leader of a country says they don't care about their own people, but they care more about somebody else's country? It's crazy what's going on. So people don't realize that NATO has provoked this. In fact, there was a peace agreement in 2014. The CIA helped overthrow the Ukraine government. And so people don't know this is what happened. And so they just think that one day Putin woke up and said, I want to go invade Ukraine because I'm a maniac. And they think that he's the bad guy. They think that he's acting rationally. We always knew he would do this. In fact, we were counting on him doing this. That's why we did what we did. And they don't know that Ukraine ramped up their bombing right before the war started last year. They doubled their bombing. They were really trying to provoke it, and they did. They provoked it. And the Russian would rather have a peace agreement. The rest of the world would rather have a peace agreement. Not NATO, not Joe Biden, not the military-industrial complex. And so that's where we are.
Let's just consider for one moment the record of the United States versus the record of Russia. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, how many wars has Russia been involved in? Not many. And I don't think any actual real wars. I mean, there were a couple of skirmishes that they had. The U.S., we haven't stopped being at war, like actual legitimate wars that have lasted decades upon decades. And most of them, I think all of them, have been offensive wars that we have somehow tried to claim were defensive, which is absurd when you go back and look at what happened, right? Just taking that into account, like, do we think that Russia was the one that started this war? Unprovoked? Wake up here.
And people don't know that, and that's what that is. That guy's saying, hey, NATO's the ones expanding. The reason why, he said it, the reason why that NATO's army is on the doorstep of Russia is because we moved, not Russia. And it's just obvious that we're the bad guys. The United States are the world's terrorists. We have 1,000 military bases. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the Korean War. We just added 3 new military bases in the Philippines. They just announced 2 weeks ago. This is how all empires end. We're overextending militarily while we have people living under every bridge. People don't have health care, a living wage. Half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 50% of wage earners earn $30,000 or less. People go bankrupt when they get sick in this country. We have homeless people everywhere, and that's because our government is 100% corrupted. It's the people think that it's corrupted like, oh, Joe Biden gave his kid a no-show job on a Ukraine energy board, or Donald Trump gave his kid a deal with the Saudi. No. That's regular corruption. I'm talking about 100%. Everything the government does, it only does it because of corruption. And that's the only way the wheels get greased is through corruption. That's why we can send $100 billion to Ukraine without any oversight, and we still won't send it to our own cities to fix our homelessness or our bridges that those homeless people are living under.
Damn, that is absolutely nuts, and that gives me shivers because think about that. Yeah, have you ever stopped to think, like, how is it that we could just send billions, hundreds of billions of dollars all over the world to these countries, but we can't spend a few $100 million for homelessness? Like, we have to do crowdfunding and all kinds of crazy crap to do this. But like, oh, we need to send hundreds of billions of dollars to this country for war? Oh, yeah, no problem. Just send that over. I mean, I'm seeing news reports on a regular basis. Yep. The United States going to send, $80 more billion, $87 more billion to Ukraine. Oh, we're going to be shipping them tanks. We're going to be shipping them Patriot missiles, all kinds of weaponry that are alone in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We can't spend any money on healthcare. We're barely, pulling by as it is. Like, we barely have any money to do what we're doing now. But yeah, let's send, hundreds of billions of dollars over there to these people on the other side of the planet, which we are using to fight a proxy war with Russia. You are absolutely 100% lying to yourself if you don't think that every single thing this guy just said is true.
We won't even fix our own goddamn country. So people don't realize that this is pretty much a banana republic. We're at the end. This is the end of this empire. We're basically Brazil with a couple of big cities that are keeping it afloat.
You think so?
Yeah.
You believe that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, when half the country can't afford a $500, this is what I like to say. What do you call a system that takes the richest country the face of the earth has ever seen and renders half of its population poor or low income? You call that a failed system. And that's what we're living in. And people think we're going to be able to vote our way out of this. What we have to do is get people in the streets. So when someone like AOC has 13 million Twitter followers and Bernie Sanders has, they're supposed to tell people to get in the streets, shut stuff down, protest, and take our government back. But they won't because they're part of the system. It's worse off having people like Bernie Sanders and AOC in the Democratic Party in government, even though Bernie claims he's an independent. He's a Democrat. And why is it worse? Because it gives people the false impression that there's somebody actually fighting for you in government, and there isn't.
So okay.
And the only way you can have change, you get people into the streets, is when they lose faith in the system. And we have to get them, we have to disabuse them of the idea that there is somebody fighting for them in this system, and there isn't.
Watching this guy say this is pretty disheartening, but when you stop and consider the world we've been living in the United States, we could be a lot worse. There's a lot of countries out there that are way, way worse than we are. It seems to be getting worse and worse every year.
Like tens of thousands of people have died. It's horrible. And a lot of them are soldiers, but a lot of them are civilians. And but to say he was unprovoked is like insane. It's just only people who know nothing about the history of this conflict would say there was no provocation. It's that the promise when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and this was like verbally promised and put in writing, was that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. And NATO at that point, the line then was through Germany, right? Like the western half of Germany was in the west, and the eastern half was with the Soviet Union. And they were like, we'll let all of these nations, secede, and the Soviet Union will collapse, and we're giving up on communism. It was one of the greatest things that ever happened. And the deal was, okay, you do that, then we won't move NATO. We won't move our military alliance into your area that used to be your realm of influence. And every single president since then has moved NATO east to the point that NATO is now on Russia's border. And he was just openly bragging about what the game is here. And then he was like, well, Ukraine is kind of like the Robin to Russia's Batman. And so our job is to steal Robin away from Batman and make him come over here and join us. And Vladimir Putin's so stupid that he won't do anything. And then Colbert's in his old character. So he's like, well, shouldn't Obama be spiking the football and saying, yeah, in your face, Putin? And Gideon Rose is like, well, no, because then Putin might invade Ukraine. So we wouldn't want to spike the ball. But there's these.
Let's
here
it is. Let's play it.
Now, Gideon, help me out here. We've got a battle. The Ukraine. Some of them want to go into the EU, the European Union, right? And some of them want to stay with Russia. If the Ukraine's not in Europe right now, what continent is it on?
Well, it's part of Eurasia, but it's part of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet bloc. It's basically Robin to Russia's Batman. And the challenge here. The challenge here is to try to attract it to the West, to get it to flip sides.
So the rebels in the streets, what are they fighting for?
They're fighting for a better future. Countries have a development.
That sounds like a political speech.
No, but it's actually true. Countries have to develop over time. And Ukraine, basically, after the end of the Soviet Union, faced two tracks. It could stay a sort of stagnant, corrupt, authoritarian country tied to Russia, or it could essentially join the West. It could modernize, liberalize, become a democracy. At the last minute, when it looked like it was going to trade up from its sort of abusive relationship with its boyfriend from the hood to a nice yuppie.
You're not loading these choices in any way whatsoever.
It's actually true. When it looked like it was going to trade up to a better environment, at the last minute, Putin offered a bribe.
How much?
$15 billion.
That's a lot of cash,
It's a lot of cash. And the president, who himself was tied to the old elites and the eastern part of the country with ties to Russia, decided to back off the change and go join Russia.
Do you know how many pirate-themed restaurants you can buy with $15 billion?
So Putin had to actually bribe the Ukraine to back off of joining NATO. If Putin was the type of person to invade Ukraine over that and not want peace, wouldn't he have just done it from the beginning? Wouldn't he have just invaded Ukraine right off the bat when they tried to do this the first time instead of bribing Ukraine?
Imagine, take it from our point of view, if like Russia was coming over here and overthrowing the pro-America government in Montreal and installing a pro-Russia government there.
There you go.
And, like this would be seen as, would you call that an unprovoked attack? Right. If we were to go in there and then go overthrow that government.
All right, guys, if you liked the video, hit that like button. If you hated it, hit it twice, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.